Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Group Therapy. My name is Derek, and with me today I have...
My name's Luke, I'm in sales.
My name's Kiefer, I'm in sales.
And Jason Bainey over here, you've seen me before.
Guess where? In sales. Today we're checking out 22 Rimfire trainer rifles.
Time for group therapy, boys.
So what we are talking about here today are 22 rifles that you can use to do long-range matches or even just get into long-range shooting at a more palatable level. So, Luke, why don't you tell us what we have here on the table?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start here at the bottom, work my way up. Here, got a CZ457. Next, we got a Bergara B14 trainer, Voodoo rifle and a Manners composite stock, another Voodoo and an AI chassis, and Tika T1X here in an AI chassis. Not represented here on the table today. We also are going to be going into on-shoots as well.
Because how could you not mention them with 22?
Absolutely. They're one of the founders.
So the whole point of this is you either want to practice with your, say, match rifle, like your PRS rifle or something, but you want to be able to do it for a whole lot less money for ammo. You want to do it with less recoil. And also, you don't always have access to the distances involved in PRS shooting. It's much easier to find 100 and 200 yard ranges where you can simulate that kind of bullet drop over that distance. So a lot of these rifles are designed to mimic a match rifle, but some are just designed to just get into long-range shooting, because 22 is the best round, I think, that you can use to get into long-range shooting with.
I agree completely.
There's no alibis with that extra barrel time. It's harder to shoot a 22 well than anything else. So
Centerfire, you can mask a lot of bad habits, where the rimfire follow through and having that long barrel time on that ammo is going to really show you the fundamentals.
Yeah, because you can get something like 40-to-1 rounds of something like a 6.5 Creedmoor to a single round of 22.
Correct.
Or vice versa. So you can shoot 40 times more 22 than you can a 6.5 Creedmoor cost-wise.
Yeah.
And you hit the nail on the head there. The whole idea of this is to get trigger time. The more time you spend behind the trigger, the better you're going to be. But with 22, me personally, since I started shooting 22, I've become a much better shot. You know, I'm able to read the wind better. I'm able to, to dial better, just my trigger time. And that has kind of referenced over into my centerfire, which is maybe a better shot on them as well.
Absolutely, because if you're looking at 22 comparison at 200 yard has very similar wind drift ballistically as a 308 at a grand or a 6.5 Creedmoor at 800.
Yeah.
and then around 300 seems like it's closer to shooting a mile, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's dope for a 22 after 300? About 14, 15 mils,
Yeah, it
something like
was
that.
13 to 14 last time I was out.
By comparison, and 6.5 Creed at 1,000's but 8,
Mhm.
8.5, something
So,
like that.
so let's talk a little bit about the differences between what we have out here on the table from, if you want to say, from mild to wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So basically, what we have are some pretty damn nice 22s, to be honest. And what we have here, I would say, represents a very solid choice, a very safe purchase. And if you're getting into 22, I do want to add that if you just happen to have an old 22, you can still use that. You want to be more selective about your scope selection, but we'll get to that later on. But yeah, something like this rifle here in particular, this CZ, the stock that's on it, the Aluthe R stock, you can get this down to a length of pull of what, 11 inches?
About 11 and a half.
Yep.
11 and a half. So if you're trying to shoot this with like your son's, for example, your son's, you don't have anything yet?
Nope.
But it's one of the shortest length of pull factory rifles in Rimfire that's still able to be extended out to
14.
14.
It'll
So,
accommodate everybody, for
Yeah.
sure.
yeah. So let's
Also adjustable comb as well. So
that's critical.
That's a critical piece too.
Very.
It's also adjustable comb.
I think all of these have these in some way. This one you kind of have to space out, I think, but all of these
the
have
Manners
a,
actually goes down to about 10 and a half.
So with that in mind, do we want to talk about what type of features that you really should look for in a 22 trainer rifle at any budget?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think main thing to look at is, one, adjustability, because especially too with having kids or wanting to get other people involved, 22 is one of the easiest way to get people introduced into the shooting sport. So if you want to look at something as like a chassis rifle, something along those lines, CZ makes an awesome chassis for those rifles. MPA, MDT, AI, if you want to go the whole way to the top of the line.
Mm-hmm.
So you can work your way up. Same thing with the mini chassis here from Manners. And the nice thing too, especially here on your Bergara and your Voodoos, is that it's a Remington 700 footprint. So they take Remington 700 triggers as well.
Yeah.
So
any of the triggers will work. That's the beauty of that. You don't need just any of the Diamondbacks, any of the triggers will work.
Yeah. And that's the same thing too. And not saying that the trigger in the Tika and CZ are bad at all. They are
fantastic.
They are fantastic for a factory trigger as well, that you can get down consistently and reliably to about 1.5 pounds.
Well, speaking of triggers, it is even more instrumental in a 22 to have a really nice trigger, because a lot of times by the time you pull the trigger, if you have any movement, that bullet's going so slow out the end of the barrel, you actually can move the rifle before the bullet gets out the end.
Yeah. I would say, and that's the key with Rimfire's trigger control, because even pulling on one side of the trigger versus the other, you're going to see it at downrange.
Yes.
Maybe not so much at 50-yard shooting group, but once you start stretching to 100, 150, it's really going to start exaggerating that.
Just Hail Marying that thing out there.
Yeah. We're on a centerfire gun. You might not start noticing that till you hit 300, 400, 500 yards.
We've all shot 22s to 300-400 yards.
Yeah.
It is so satisfying to squeeze the trigger on a piece of steel at 300, and you wait about 10 minutes, and that round hits. That is very fun.
Oh, and especially we don't have one represented on the table, but get a souped up 1022 and you can mag dump out there at 300 yard.
You have 5 of them in the air before any of them hit.
Then you have 10 echoes coming back at you. It's awesome.
Well, one thing I did want to mention, just so people know, rimfire triggers are different than centerfire triggers.
Correct.
So you cannot dry fire rimfire triggers.
Right, and that's more to do with the firing pin than the trigger itself.
Correct.
Though.
So I don't want somebody to get a 22 and go home and practice dry firing. Next thing you know, go to the range.
Just get snap caps.
Dry fire practice is good.
There are snap caps or yellow drywall anchors. My wife gets so mad when she does laundry after I've been out at the range, because I have yellow drywall anchors all through my pocket that I stick in my 22s to help protect my chamber face.
To illustrate why, for someone who might not know, on a traditional centerfire rifle, if I use this scope to simulate the casing, you have your firing pin right into the primer, right in the middle, and that sets it off. Totally safe to dry fire, because that's just going to go into nothing when you squeeze the trigger. On a rimfire gun, hence the name, it's not so much a cylinder, a pin that hits the primer. It's like kind of like a flathead screwdriver shaped thing, and that hits the rim, the side of the case. And when that bolt
typically either at 12 o'clock or 6 o'clock.
Yeah, and when that bolt is in the rifle and you dry fire it, that flat face firing pin is going to strike on another piece of metal inside the chamber area, and that's going to eventually kind of peen that off, and it's not going to be very effective.
Peen a burr into the chamber. Basically.
Yeah, so a couple
also
times
mess up the firing pin.
Yeah. I mean, a couple times, not a huge deal, but you definitely do not want to make a habit of that at all. One thing that I do want to talk about, especially with you, because you have a very in-depth background on internal ballistics on 22s, more so than me. So when it comes to things like barrel length, normally on a centerfire rifle, the longer the barrel, the more your velocity, and that'll help you cut through wind. It'll be a little bit less drop. There's a point with every round where there's a sweet spot of having a barrel that's too long for a practicality. With a 22, though, you're not chasing velocity because you still want the round to be subsonic. So can you speak to anything about barrel length and accuracy and velocity and that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. With rimfire, though, this is the fun part about rimfire, is that there's a lot of theories. It's very tough to prove really anything with rimfire, because it's very, very lot sensitive and based on different lots of ammo, which that's a whole conversation we'll get into later here in this episode. But it only takes 16 inches of rifling to stabilize a 22 bullet. So if you look, that's why, and for legality purposes anyway, most barrels you'll see here, like on the CZ457 here, it's 16 and a half. They go for 16 and a half, 18s and 20s. So as you work your way up the spectrum, your 16 and a half inch barrel, you're going to have, it's almost like a bell curve on a 22 when you're looking at barrel length. So it's going to be fast here, fast at your 16, 18, and then about 20, 21, it kind of peaks off. Then it starts dropping back down once you start hitting 22, 23, 24. So the longer the barrel is actually going to start slowing it down.
It's used up its energy from the charge, and now
Correct.
it's just hitting that
The
friction.
drag is overcoming.
So if you look at it for practicality standpoint, if you look at a lot of rimfire bench rest shooters, their barrels are going to be between 22 to 24 because they want to keep that muzzle velocity around 1060, 1050, 1060 because they're only shooting 50 yards. And so through extensive amount of testing from rimfire bench rest shooters, they're keeping it around 1050 to 1060 for 50-yard shooting. Where in the conversations that we're having now going through with long range, we're trying to squeeze every ounce of velocity we can out of these things without going supersonic.
How much velocity change? I know this is a loaded question, of course, but can you speak to a general average as far as velocity between a 16 and a 20 inch? Because on a 308, for example, that might be 100, 150 feet per second. On a 22, it might be what?
It's only roughly maybe 15 to 20 feet per second.
Yeah, we just talked about this, ironically. This 18-inch barrel actually is putting out 1089 feet per second.
Okay.
My son's 22 is a 20-inch barrel. It's basically putting out about 15 feet per second more. It's
Same
not
gun.
that much. Same exact gun.
Still a voodoo.
Still a voodoo.
Yeah.
Just difference in barrel length between 18 and 20. So it's very, very minimal.
Yeah. So when it comes to barrel length, especially on a 22 trainer, there is the argument of you want your rifle to feel about the same balance as well as your comp gun or your standard centerfire rifle.
And that's why these AIs that I brought along here, that's the direction I'm going for some things, and I'm really glad that AI's doing the ATX stock in the ATX chassis, which isn't out yet, but they're doing one to fit the T1X and Remington. So T1X, I love that rifle since it came out.
Oh, they're so
Had
good.
one for a few years. That one, the one here in the Elite Sand chassis,
is very
that is a
impressive.
prototype chassis. That one's got about 5,000 rounds through it.
I'll tell you what's also funny about seeing, if you looked at this table from a distance, maybe not counting this one, you look at this and go, okay, we got some 6.5, some 308s in there if you're not betrayed by the magazine. And what's funny is you see all these badass rifles. You get one up on the line, you're looking all badass, and all of a sudden you squeeze the trigger and it goes, there's no recoil whatsoever.
We've all been there.
Yep.
Yeah, but
What do you have there, sir?
is that a 50? No.
Yeah.
Well, one thing we didn't talk about either was suppression on these.
Yes.
We pretty much all do shoot suppressed.
Yeah,
So
and that's just hilarious.
it is. I mean, literally, no sound. I mean, it's
especially
just- you
especially
can-
when you're training people, you can sit there without hearing protection all day. And that whole you mentioned the whole length of pull thing earlier, which is vastly important to me because my young sons I've had shooting these guns. So, anywhere from the 10.5 to 11.5, and then on the AIs, they min out at around 12.5, I believe, which my 9-year-old can get on comfortably now. He's been shooting actually my AX since he was 6, and that's at 12.5 length of pull. But 10.5 is definitely better for shorter stature to get started, to get comfortable. But having that flexibility, if you're going to get kids, ladies, just shorter statured people involved, that's incredibly valuable. And if you are running rifles similar to these, if you have the opportunity to put a full-size stock to make it feel just like your rifle that you're trying to get good with, by all means you want to do it.
I mean,
But-
when it comes to suppressors, 22 cans are not too hyper expensive, and now with the ATF's e-file, I got my Surefire 5.56 can back in 2 months.
Yeah. I mean,
And 22s with barrel lengths like this aren't really that loud to begin with. You can probably get away without having a suppressor, and it's still pretty darn quiet.
Right.
But
Just
with the
makes it
can
so
on,
much
it is
nicer.
Hollywood
Yeah.
quiet. I mean, like you can dispatch groundhogs and your neighbor won't notice
it is. When you're shooting steel to 100 yards, actually the bullet hitting the steel is louder than the whole
Yes.
firing
So
process.
when you're shooting
Yeah.
dirt
Yeah.
at 50 yards,
The
it's
firing
louder
pin.
than
Yeah. You
The
get a
fall
bad
of the
louder
firing
echo.
pin
Yeah.
is as loud as the actual report of the gunshot, it seems. So
Yeah.
it's just hilarious.
And going back to the ballistics with the same thing with centerfire, you
Yeah.
slap a suppressor on this, is going to speed it up as well.
Yeah, because there's still just a little bit of pressure
Yep.
coming
a little
through that
extra
can.
poof out there.
Yep.
Yeah.
that was kind of a little bit of a misconception. Sometimes I've heard guys talking about on a 22 that if you put a suppressor, it actually slows them down. No, it still speeds them up, just like a centerfire rifle.
A little bit, yeah. But I mean,
not as drastically, but it's still.
I mean, you said it was what, a 15 feet per second between 18 and 20 inch. Maybe it's 20 feet per second between 16 and 20. Maybe.
Yeah.
How much of an impact does that actually make when you're doing 300 yard 22, 200 yard 22?
I mean,
drop. I mean, it's not much.
It is, and it's especially too like whenever we get into the whole ammo testing conversation, is that extreme spread when you're talking about long range rimfire is going to be key. When you're looking at,
but you would take a lower velocity if it's way consistent.
Absolutely, and we can. I was going to say we'll get into
and
that.
Rimfire is inherently very inconsistent from lot to lot.
Yes.
So that's the whole thing.
But to a degree, especially if you're practicing, like you're not going for match shooting, like straight out performance, you're just trying to learn. It's okay if your bullet drops more over a distance because that's what you're here for.
Yeah.
So it's okay if you're not having the utmost in velocity, as long as it's relatively consistent from a learning standpoint. That's good.
Yeah, it's a little different on rimfire than centerfire though, because you're losing RPM. So you might have a load that's killer, hitting baseballs at 200, but then at 300 you can't hit a full size silhouette.
Right. So what you're saying is the speed down the barrel, the extra 20 feet per second, whatever it is
might add 50 yards to
translates. The faster it goes through the barrel, the faster the bullet actually spins.
Right.
So you're getting a little bit of an increase in the RPM stability of the bullet.
So the higher feet per second is definitely better for longer range.
And that assumes you don't custom make your barrel with some twist. Like if you were to make a long range 22 just from scratch, what would your twist rate be?
I would still. I'm playing with a 1 and 9. It should be here in a little bit. So that might be a conversation later on a podcast that we can have, but I'm going to be playing with one. But for right now,
it hasn't really been proven.
It hasn't been proven
There's
or
some work
denied.
going on, yeah.
But it's still out there. So right now, the standard is 1 in 16 twist. 1 in 16 or 1 in 16 and a half is what you see coming out of all manufacturers.
Yeah.
Your 9 twist made me think of my Mark 12, which is actually an 8 twist, but it reminded me of it. I have a 22 kit for my ARs. And one of the things that I like to do is get some practice on those things, just in the same way that you guys would with the bolt guns. And through my Mark 12, I just put a 22 kit in there. With some 22s, I kid you not, the feet at 100 yards was yards big. But I had some of that suppressor ammo, that 45 grain American Eagle, and 200 yards, it was doing that. That's
another softball size group.
Yeah, a softball size group at that, and those.
Out of an AR.
Out of an AR, because those 22 conversion kits, that bullet has to pass through 2 inches of free
2-inch free bore.
That's a 1 in 16 twist, isn't it?
Well, mine's an 8 twist, but his 9 kind of reminded me of that whole thing. And it was actually very good, but with the ammunition that it liked, it was fantastic. But with that other ammo, I forget what it was just terrible. I don't blame the ammo. It's not designed to be accurate in there, but it just goes to show how different 22
the more fine
can shoot.
You get in development will eliminate some things from working.
Yeah. And also, I mean, don't forget, a lot of guys have precision ARs that would benefit from this. And what I'd say, even though it's not going to shoot near as good as something like these guns here, do a group at 25, 50, 100, see what the rifle just does. If it's doing a 2-inch group at 50 yards, and you just extrapolate that out, and you know what to expect. Just loosen your accuracy standards there, and if you're shooting down at distance, you'd still be able to determine what is a good hit or not from that. Not the best solution, but for less than $200 for a conversion kit, and you have your rifle, not some stand-in or some other gun, I'd say that's worth looking at.
Well, yeah, getting any of the extra trigger time is good, and even the ground up, 22 ARs that are out there. Smith & Wesson MP15, we're running those for a little bit as well. That also helps in the length of pull discussion because those go down to around 10.5 or 11, I believe, as well. So I used that initially starting off.
I believe this is 10.5.
Yeah, the Manners is 10.5.
Which is really good for youths.
Yeah,
that's one reason why when we originally got them,
CS.
Jason and I talked about getting those stocks because it's going to last our kids the rest of their lives.
Right. You said Manners CS is what this is?
CS, yeah.
CS. Oof, look at that.
Yeah, they're very.
Yeah,
Looks
10
like they
and a half
didn't
to
finish it
13 and
yet.
a half.
Looks like it was cropped in Photoshop.
Yeah.
I was gonna say while we're kind of messing around with the rifles here on the table, I wanted to. This is something we didn't cover earlier. Magazines for these rifles.
Yep.
So CZ has their own
Go ahead.
proprietary mag, 5 or 10 shots as well. Same thing with Bagara. Bagara comes with 10s. They're also doing 5s now.
That's an AICS pattern, isn't it?
Yes, and that's exactly where I was going.
And that's where the development is going.
That's where the trend is.
for
that
the
is
trainer
where
aspect.
Yeah.
So you can use the Manners bottom metal. You can use their mini
Yeah,
chassis.
You don't need to use a 22 stock
Correct.
or chassis.
Correct.
And
Or
that's
the old banana. Remember the old banana?
Yep.
Uh,
where such as
It's
on
still in the fridge.
yeah.
such as on shoots and CZ are the banana style mags where
Yeah.
you have the 10 rounds and everything like that. But that was a massive game changer in the 22 world from Voodoo was the AICS pattern magazines. And then Tika
Because you're still getting the feel.
as well, they have their own proprietary mags, which
And-
there's nothing wrong with on-shoot CZ or anything like that. It is a little bit, if you're using it for a dedicated trainer for your centerfire
Just
rifle,
a consideration.
it's a little different. Just keep that in mind in consideration. Not saying that
Well,
an
there's
AICS
often
mags is better, but
there's often two separate but sometimes overlapping schools of thought here. You have long range training. You have your PRS type training rifle.
Mhm.
That needs to emulate your match gun closely. So with something like this,
It's the
it's
same trigger release.
It's the same
Or,
chassis,
I guess,
same
mag
everything here,
release.
but also
Well, also, the
in
same trigger could
matches
be.
Yeah.
in matches that require more magazines, guys will have pouches. You can fit these 22 magazines in your same short action mag pouch if you run one of those. So you can get used to the whole reloading process.
And another, before we leave magazines, something I want to mention on
Mm-hmm.
the T1X. So, in general, the T1X has the same footprint as a T3.
Yep.
However, not all T3 chassis or stocks will fit the T1X. T1X has a couple minor considerations, which will cause you some issues if it's not allowed for. So, the bolt stop on the T1X on like a conventional Manners, where the sidewalls are high, like it's a centerfire, the bolt notch will not line up. So there may be some considerations there, or as some newer stocks come out, they're kind of moving down that line, so the side of the stock doesn't come up as far around the action, like with his new LRH. But basically, so the one consideration is the bolt stop. That may have some conflict with your T3 chassis, but then also the hardware, the giant cap screw that holds the magazine hardware to the receiver comes down and will actually hit the partition between the mag well and the hole where the trigger drops down through. So there needs to be about a 1/2 inch of relief on that, and not all stock makers are keen to that yet. So AI is the first one to bring out a specific T1X chassis that I'm aware of, where it has the mag well suited to it. You know, all of the other ones, you've got your normal full-size centerfire mag well, and you're just chucking that little mag up in the big hole, which really isn't a big deal. I've been doing it for
If you
as
can
long
kind
as
of
the
look, you
T1X
can
has been
kind of
out.
see a little bit.
So
how
yeah,
that-
so that is that's the scenario on the AI, and then generally on everything else, you're going to be chucking it up in a normal AICS, size magwell, which again isn't a big deal, but they went the extra mile on that one.
They did it right.
And that's
Yeah.
good because the T1X especially, we all love it. A lot of people love it. We're trying to get it back in stock because there's about 1 million people that have them backward. But it's good to see that support by companies like AI to make their own chassis for us.
especially for price point getting into it.
Right.
Yeah, we have this
Bang
in
for the dollar.
we have this in an $1,800 chassis right now. But
Yeah, $500 right.
It is the
but for-
least expensive on the table.
But for five and change, and there are other companies out there that are making, like what we were talking about, that you
Right.
could do a 3, 4, you could do just about as much with this as what
I
you
mean,
can
we've
do
got
with
a handful of
They
other
carry-
chassis that'll
carry
fit.
GRS. Do they have?
GRS,
Yeah.
Wooks, Masterpiece,
Mhm.
And the
MDT.
accuracy out of these
KRGs
is
coming.
fantastic.
Mhm.
and Luke took that and tested it out after I had between 4,000 and 5,000 rounds through it between my son and I. And
That must have taken forever.
I have only pulled a bore snake through it ever.
Okay.
So he
It
was
doesn't take that long.
he was very
Believe me.
concerned about the condition of my lead and everything. And turns out.
It was very impressive. It was what 0.17 in a 5-shot group.
I don't know. He
0.18.
cleaned it up, took it out, fouled it up, and tested it across.
And that
some
was
different
with
ammos.
factory stock. It wasn't in this setup.
Yeah.
It was factory stock
It just went in that stock the other day. So
with a Vortex Venom quality, like a $500 scope, a Harris bipod, and game changer rear bag at 50 yard. It's just
You were shooting
impressive.
minus plus.
Center X.
Center X, all
Yep.
right.
well, it was one. Yeah, he shot 6. I think. at
Yeah, I
least
did
6
7 or 8
types.
different lots. And I did 6 to 7 different types of ammo. But yeah, the Center X, a lot of Center X in that rifle was just very impressive.
And
So
just something quickly on the T1X before we leave that. So,
Yeah.
so here's the factory T1X synthetic stock, and something you can do if you don't want to go crazy on the chassis. Tika has different, wider forends. You can get different grip angles, and then you can get rid of the factory hard plastic butt plate. It basically fits all of the T3 stock replacement parts as well. So change the grip angle, change the butt pad, change the forend.
So this barreled action and that stock is coming in at $599.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Which for 22 that shoots as well as that does.
It's fantastic. Yes.
And that's
Triggers-
kind of, we can
triggers great.
go up that line
Yeah.
too. $599 Tika stock. You're looking at $1069 for the Bagara, and you're looking right around $1169,
Yep.
plus or minus a few dollars here and there.
And on the CZ, you can get into them in the 6s. So
Correct. They make their MTR, which is right around 750, 800, which is a fantastic rifle as well. That's more set up for a bench rest style, but
Yeah.
you can go anywhere from like $600 to $700 on your CZ up to $1,600, where they took the 457 and put it in a Manners Precision.
And this is considered the 457 tactical.
correct.
So here's a question I have. A lot of the times I could tell you, where does your money go for a good centerfire rifle? Not counting things like they have an expensive chassis on it. What type of performance additives per dollar do you typically see that are uniquely 22? Like, where does your money go in something like this, or even like
Ammo.
like the airsoft rifle?
Ammo testing.
Yeah, I mean, ammo is the most significant expense other than the original firearm. But,
Not price per round per se, but sinking money into going and finding
that
that
shoots the best.
that
the
specific
lot that your
lot.
rifle likes the best.
Yep.
So the
Yeah.
question is something like, in this scale here, which is not your average layout of 22s, this CZ for a little over $1,000, would you say get this and spend $500 on ammo, as opposed to getting something like a $1,500 22 as well? Like, how would you go about figuring that out? Because with the variants that you can get with different 22 groups, and I took this Voodoo out a few months ago to do some shooting, and there was some good differences, but honestly, a lot of them shot pretty well.
That was 50 yards too. When you're
That was
when you're
50.
going to 200, it'll
And
all
it's all dependent on
separate.
that's a little bit of a loaded question too, because if you
Of course
look,
it is.
if you look,
I'm here to just make you uncomfortable on camera to
exactly,
people in the comment section.
I think
Exactly.
we should have just named the podcast that.
yeah, what makes you uncomfortable? Yeah.
You're forced to make a comment that people
But
are
going
gonna,
on to something like that here, so say you look at this Voodoo for a barreled action, you're looking at $1,900. Plus, then you get a chassis and everything like that. In the whole scheme of things, these shoot SK Standard Plus amazing when you find that right lot. Now, granted, it's not going to be as consistent as what your Center X or Midas or something along those lines, but these you can find lots of SK Standard Plus, which is right around $600 a case, $620 a case, and they shoot very incredible out to 100 to 150 yards. And that's kind of, and same thing with these two. That's kind of where do you want to shoot. So if you're planning on target engagements of like 150 and in,
You don't need
You
to
can
spend
spend a
this
whole
money.
lot less on
Yeah.
everything.
correct.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can get away with shooting SK Standard Plus, SK Rifle Match, and still shoot very competitive groups. Because with 22s in a 10-shot group, if you're running out at 100 yards and 100 yards plus, if you're getting minute of angle to 3/4 minute of angle groups,
That's excellent.
that's
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
not
it's
it's very seldom are you going to see quarter-minute groups in a 10-shot group. I mean, yeah, you can do it in 3s and 4s, 5s, but that's not really testing rimfire.
And that becomes more the shooter's capability and the rifle's capability.
Correct.
right.
Especially watching that group form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Psychologically.
Kiefer's a real big fan of.
That's why I like shooting at
Watching that
distances
group.
where I can't see the group.
Yeah,
Me
Where
too.
I'll back off the power on the scope. Like, nope, don't need to see this. I can
Yeah.
We'll figure it out when we get down there.
I can shoot a 3-shot group great, but a 5-shot I can't do. I psych myself out all the time.
Naturally.
Yeah.
So one thing that I do want to mention here as well is it's easy to get caught up and spend a ton of money on this stuff, but a lot of the times from the people that I talk to and friends of mine, they want to learn long range shooting, but they want to do it like, how cheaply could you get into it? So
$599,
yeah.
$300 scope.
Yeah, scopes. I want to
Yeah.
talk scopes real quick because, give me that. This is a Vortex Venom.
Yep.
525. I'd say, all things considered for price, this is going to be the best learning scope to use for not only just for rimfire, but for centerfire. But it's good on rimfire, I think, for a couple reasons. It's got a 15-yard parallax, which is nice.
Key on a rimfire.
For a rimfire, if you're just reasonably casually getting into it, I would say, and you'd go 25-yard absolute minimum for parallax. 15 is great, but
a maximum minimum of 25.
A max min,
mini,
or a min max of max min of 25. Stick to that, you'll be good. It's got about 85 minutes of total travel, which if you put this on a 20-minute rail, you're hitting 300 yards on this. The turrets are nice, the glass is good. It's $200 cheaper, or $300 cheaper now, I think, than the Strike Eagle that it's based off of. And for $500, and right now we're filming this on the 17th of May. Till the end of the month, we have a lot of Vortex at 50% off MSRP, which I think gets this down to somewhere, dare I say, in the high threes.
Well, another consideration, even one step
Military,
below that,
law enforcement,
is the Diamondback Tactical.
Diamondback Tactical is
Which
a
is
good
a
option if you're giving up a couple things though. The turrets are a bit more difficult to keep track of than something like this because they don't have as nice like a zero stop type thing, and I think the glass on this is noticeably better. But yeah,
the minimum budget you could be out of it for $800-900. I mean, you're under $1,000.
Yeah, $500-600
with a rail,
for the gun.
Yeah.
Other scope brands that have close parallax, and basically what you want in a rimfire trainer scope, especially one at budget, and you're being really, really selective. Exposed turrets, I suggest at least 75 MOA of total travel. Put that on a 20-minute rail, you're hitting 300. A reticle that is set up in either MOA or mills. First focal plane.
Intelligent reticle.
Intelligent reticle. A Christmas tree reticle, a little bit more intimidating to learn at first, but better in the long run. First focal plane, really advise it, and a closer parallax. You don't need a ton of power though.
You don't,
because at shooting 22 especially, you can get a lot of practice done
even
at
if it's a 10x
200 yards. Yeah, 10x 200 yards. Like so that Diamondback Tactical, they do a 4 to 12 or 3 to 12.
4 to 6. There is a 3 to 12.
There's a 3 to 12 1-inch tube. There's a 4 to 16 as well. I think the 4 to 16 is the one that you start to have the parallax adjustment. I think the 3 to 12 is fixed.
Yes,
so I would say
avoid adjustable parallax.
That one for this particular.
4 to 16, 6 to 24. They have 8 and 10 yard parallax on there.
Yeah. So that short parallax is nice, but something like that, you're into it for about 300 some bucks. Athlon has a ton of scopes that meet those same parameters for about $300 or so. So when you pair that up with some $60-$70 rings, $60 rail,
so you're out the door at under $1,000.
Yeah, for a really good shooting, you can take that to 300 yards.
And again, this is somebody that's just getting into it that wants to do a rifle.
Yeah.
For the people that already have a tactical centerfire, they're going to have a little bit different design of what they want as a rifle based upon trying to mimic the features that their centerfire has.
And especially going back to here real quick before we keep rolling on with the rails that we were talking about. Most common with these two, we were talking 20 MOA rail, which is very common with centerfire, but with all these rimfires we got out here, there's options for 20, 30, and 40 MOA rails. So, like this one here is a 40 MOA rail, so you can get even more travel out of
it. Which really depends on the scope you're going to pick.
Yes, it does. And you can still get a 50-yard zero with a 40 MOA rail, where sometimes with centerfire, you're running a big MOA, you might not be getting a 100-yard zero. Where with rimfire, you can still get your 50-yard zero, even with a very high inclination.
Speaking of scopes and rails and travel and such, I want to try and ascertain kind of where does the setup go from sort of normal everyday to highly specialized? Because most scopes have about between 80 to 100 minutes of travel. And with those, you can put 40, 50-minute rail on that if you're really trying to eke it out as best you can. And 400 yards on the 22. On my 22 is, according to my Kestrel here, 22.5 mils. So what's that in MOA? About it's about 80, something like that.
Really close.
80 MOA. So I mean that's cutting it pretty close. That assumes you have a scope with 80 minutes and you put it on a 40-minute rail and you can still get your 0 and you can just barely get there. So with most scopes and most rail options, you can get most 22s out to 300 yards, provided the ammo is good.
Yep.
Once you start flirting with 400, I think
beyond 3, it gets a little different.
Beyond 3, you got to be really selective about your
for sure
your rail slope, your scope travel, and 22 is pretty solid out to 200 yards or so if the wind's calm. Once you go past that though, it's
300 still starts to get swirly. But even on the budget rigs, you were talking about originally with that T1X there with 4,000 to 5,000 rounds through it in the regular plastic stock. Well, which in fact it wasn't in the original plastic stock. It was in a compact T3 stock because I needed it to fit my son. As far as 300-yard capability, I watched him hit a prairie dog silhouette. It was at least, I think it was 6 times in a row.
That's what about this?
So
about this big
16.9 ounce water bottle.
Yeah.
300 yards. I have actual video of him hitting it 6 times in a row, which just blows my mind.
And there's something else that I do want to mention. It's easy to just spend a ton of money on this stuff, but if your goal is to save money shooting 22, it's kind of like that Stephen Colbert joke where if you're complaining about high gas prices, just go buy a Tesla. $60,000 to it's the same sort of argument that one could make if your goal is to save money.
Right.
That's why I wanted to mention how cheaply you could get into this. So you need to balance
600 to 6,000.
Yeah, so you need to balance where you're saving money. If you're buying something like this to practice with your trainer rifle, you need to shoot a ton of 22 to make it financially, mathematically speaking, worth it as far as that goes.
Right. And both of them are fun because, I mean, all 4 of us sitting here at the table have either owned both or have shot a lot on both your budget builds or your $4,000 setups. And
exactly.
They both serve their own purposes, but that's what's awesome about Rimfire is it's fun. Every time you go out, it's frustrating as heck, but it's still
and everybody can do it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the availability of ranges.
That's the thing.
We're lucky we can do it around our homes.
Yeah.
You know, we have that ability. We have a small range. It doesn't bother the neighbors.
And that's a big thing, too, with like types of matches like NRL 22 and the PRS. They're starting to pop up everywhere because you can run a great match if your local gun club has 200 yards.
Yep.
You can run an amazing match, just tighten up the MOA size on your targets. And
just adjust it. Make the position harder, make the target smaller. You can definitely have some fun doing that.
And even just at your local club shooting a 50 or 100-yard bench match, taking one of these out rear bag bipod and shooting paper
it's fun.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Especially when you can sit there and do it all day without hearing protection.
Correct. Yeah. And you're not spending all day in the reloading room either afterwards. Number one question that is probably out there about Rimfire is, and we have this on the daily here in the office, is how do you clean them? What is your cleaning regimen? That's probably the number one thing. And I know me and Jason go back and forth on this on the daily, and everybody else does. Everybody else has their own theories, everything like that. So, I mean, you can shoot a case through it and only pull a brush through it, or every 300 to 400 rounds. I know typically here, like on your Tikas with a little bit open chamber, they're bench chambers, stuff like that. They're not as a tight consistency match chamber. They're still a match chamber, but it's not as tight as what, say, a Voodoo is. Because I know, like me and Kiefer with our Voodoos, it's about every 200 to 300 rounds we're cleaning them, because you can definitely notice.
What do you notice?
The group opening up.
The group openings up.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, you just let it tell you when it...
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing is know your rifle.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell everybody is know your rifle, because I have on shoots that I can go 700, 800 rounds and nothing. And then all of a sudden your rifle is going to be like, hey, probably need to run a couple patches and some stuff down. Yeah.
Yeah. Like on a weekend, if my son shoots this, you'll see the groups open up. I'll just run a bore snake through it.
The overall
and
theme
it goes
here,
right back.
is listen to your rifle,
Right.
and the cleaning regimen is very minimal.
Yeah.
It is.
And that goes into ammo testing as well. And that's we could have a whole separate episode of podcast on ammo testing. There's some great resources out there from Lapua and Ely about having your rifle sent out there, getting it tested for specific lots and everything like that.
There's also some other service or special thing done with 22s where you cut the barrel at a certain length down towards the muzzle.
Slug it.
Yes.
Yes. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so what slugging is that so you pretty much take a bullet, take it and push it down through. And as you go down through, you'll feel the tight spot on a barrel blank. And at that barrel blank, that's where a lot of gunsmiths say that's where your most accuracy is. So it's slugging or choking, they call it, because you want that bullet exiting
Only
at the
with
tight
their
spot.
consent.
At the tightest
Only with their
spot,
consent,
because and the reason why we don't care about that as much on center fires is there's more pressure behind the bullet, and the bullet continues to obturate and fill the bore, where the 22, once it's squeezed down, it doesn't come back. There's no rebounding.
It
There's no
stays.
Yeah,
obturation.
and they're not jacketed.
Correct.
They might be plated, but they're not jacketed.
And that's another thing, speaking
Softer.
of ammo, you're going to see the lubes that various manufacturers use. You'll see the buildup on it.
Yeah.
Right.
So
And also, that plays into something I wanted to mention. And maybe part of why my bore snake regimen might have worked is because I would tend to do it right after we're done. So everything's warmed up. It's not sitting there crusty.
Okay, so a few days ago, I asked people on Facebook to leave their 22 questions. So there's a few
Yes.
here. I'm hoping someone, at least one of you guys, can answer it. I'm sure you can.
yeah.
First question, and you also touched on this a little bit, but if you could kind of reiterate. First question from Jeremy Smith: why choose 16-inch versus a 20-inch barrel from a velocity perspective when it comes to 22?
Yeah, we did mention that. My take on it is 16-inch barrel. Like, I'm more the practicality. I'm not trying to max out the performance of a 22 myself. I want that tiny bit of extra drop, and I want this gun to be small, especially when you put a suppressor on it. So from a velocity standpoint for learning, I'd say go short. If you're trying to wring out every molecule of performance from the 22,
Go ideal.
longer.
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
18-20.
16, you're still good to 200 though, which can still accomplish a whole lot.
That's
Yeah.
kind of what I always told everybody. Everybody would kind of ask me, hey, what's your preferred barrel length? And I would say, well, if you're going to run suppressed, go 18.
Just don't mess up the crown because you can't
Correct.
shorten the barrel and recut it.
Correct. So that's why I'd always say 18 if you're going to go suppressed, go 20 to 22 if you're going to go unsuppressed.
Yep.
Just for practicality and velocity.
Yeah.
Next question from David Wells: what is the best way to true your dope using velocity and BC?
That one's going to be trial and error, I think, isn't it?
Well, the BC.
Like, that assumes that you have your Kestrel, and
Yeah.
the data that it's spitting out is not matching what you're shooting downrange. It's not matching what you're observing.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times you have to get your hard data at the range that you're looking at.
Right.
And then-
And briefly, what I've done on it before, I keep a profile on my Kestrel, which is just sub 22s for now. I haven't named it to be each gun just because I've been bouncing around, perfecting things, switching brands, switching ammos. So I'll just, I know at 200 yards, it's about 7 mils. I'll put 7 mils on shoot, and then I'll just tweak. Well, I can get the velocity. You can know the velocity, with chronograph, and then I'll shoot. And if it's 7.2 or whatever, I'll basically just tweak the BC till it lines up.
Yeah, so
I was
if
gonna
you
say,
should
have
line everything
A
else up.
pretty standard number to start at for BC, especially with Lapua, Center X, and Midas Plus, and even SK Standard is .123.
Easy
G1.
number to remember.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Is start there, and then you can tweak it.
Yeah.
Tweak it as confirming once you get to 200 to 300. But that's a great starting point. Plug in your muzzle velocity, .123, and then if you need to adjust it a point or two here or there.
Yeah,
based
mine
on
came
your
up
load.
as .132.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is what my overall was that met my accuracy.
And
Yep.
each
but
barrel can
basically
affect
to
that.
To,
too.
address,
So-
to get to the meat of his question is, if you have data at 50, 100, 150, 200, you have the hard data that your rifle has shown you. Write that down,
and back into it.
and then you can tweak your BC on your Kestrel, your app, whatever you have, until it lines
Best
up with
fit.
all of those.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because just doing it at one distance isn't good enough. You need more data
Multiple.
points.
Yep.
So having 4 or 5 data points between min and max range is going to give you enough to get a nice curve out of it. So then BC is what we suggest you tweak first. just a little
Yeah,
bit
because
here
generally you can get a velocity, get an observed value on that pretty well
and there. Yeah.
with the chronographs these days.
Mhm.
So that's
Going back to that conversation too that we were having about extreme spread, especially when you're starting to shoot long range, having a very low extreme spread on your lot of ammo is going to score you more hits out of 3
again
and 4.
High
beyond
round
200,
counts
it'll
too.
all come into it. Then.
High round counts. Can't just do a 3-5 round group per distance.
I wish.
Get a ton of rounds in there.
Yeah.
I
to
wish
get a really
Rimfire was
good-
as easy as center fire, racking 5 down, going, yeah, we're good. That's a good load.
No.
No, it's going to be.
But to address what he was getting at, I'd say at least 10, 15, 20 rounds
Yes.
per range to really get a good sample size.
Cool. The only other question I have on here from Scott Tucker, he asks, Anschutz, am I saying that right? I've never said the
No
word.
one says it right. Some people put the letter L in it.
I've done that before. I used to call it Anschutz.
Yeah,
That's
that's a Pennsylvania thing, I think.
yeah.
So what's the actual pronunciation? Do we know? an
On
official?
shoots.
On shoots.
On
shoots?
No one
When
actually
you hear
knows.
Jochen say it, that's the only way.
Yeah, on shoots.
Okay. So Anschutz is known for, quote, choking their 22 barrels. Do any other manufacturers do this?
Sounds pretty rude.
Yeah.
I mean, if they like it, but
I know on shoots does.
I'm not going to yuck anybody's yum.
I know on shoots chokes their barrels, and I'm not 100% sure of the processes what they use to determine choking. From what I've been explained it as, is it's essentially slugging. Is that they're cutting their barrels at their heart at the tightest
Wherever that
spot.
point happens to
Correct.
exist,
It's a hammer-
not lapping it into it.
Okay, so
because those are Hammerfords barrels, aren't they? On the Anschutz rifles,
I always
The
thought they were.
Hammerforged?
I assumed they were buttoned.
because
But
we can. I'm going to
have to
speculate here.
revisit
So
that.
Yeah.
I'm going to speculate that if it is a Hammerforged barrel, wouldn't it be reasonable that you could have the mandrel that the barrel is hammered onto?
That'd be the
You
choking
could
point.
you could tool that so that it's a tiny bit
Right.
narrower at the muzzle than it is further back.
it
to
generally
the
can be accomplished with lapping too, if you want to lap
True.
a choke into.
That's a really good question.
So, also to elaborate, just because I'm not as knowledgeable as you guys are, explain to me and other people who might not know what is choking.
I mean,
I know shotguns what a choke is, but in this
Yes.
instance, what does he mean?
he kind of touched on it with slugging.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean you're
Are
basically
the terms
you're-
interchangeable?
This slugging is physically pushing a
bullet.
a lead slug through
With
the
a-
bore.
with a rod.
Right,
So
right.
you'll find it'll get tighter. Get to the tightest spot. You want to mark it, and you push it more, and it gets freed up. So
Like
the barrel will bell mouth a little bit because
Yeah.
of how the lapping was done or whatever.
The diameter of the barrel
It's
of the
constricted.
bore is a very tiny amount smaller.
Right.
Like
about-
1/10,000th of an inch.
Yeah, something tiny like that at some length, 20
And
inches
that's
down
where
the
they
barrel.
want to
or
cut
so.
it then.
Yeah.
Ideally.
For the end of the barrel.
So the tightest tolerance of the taper
Correct.
And ideally, I
In
mean,
the
you want
bore,
to find.
yeah.
in the bore.
Ideally, you want to find a rimfire barrel, but I mean, I've seen them. I've seen them all. I've seen barrels that have been loose and then they get really tight at the end, shoot great. I've also seen them shoot bad. I've seen barrels that have been
That's what's tough about all
Perfect.
this. There's
perfect
no
consistency, the same amount of pressure going the whole way down through after you slug them and
Shoot like garbage.
shoot like garbage or shoot like the best barrel you've ever seen. So that's what's fun and absolutely frustrating about rimfires. That's where
That's why I don't put too much. I'm not chasing groups. I'm out there to have fun and practice. And if it's a half inch at 50 one day, if it's a quarter inch at 50 a different day, great.
you're doing good.
If you're trying to do competition,
That's a different story.
Different story. And
Yes.
you need to pull out all the stops for performance there. But for most people, just casually shooting 22, I'd say that's getting a little bit serious.
I just want to make a quick mention before we get a bunch of questions I don't have an answer to. The Blue Do,
Let me guess. Does it involve AI?
it does. So I call this the Blue Do, which is the Voodoo in the ATX chassis. And this is the T1X
Sandu.
in the Elite Sand T1X ATX chassis. A couple things. These are prototypes. We have no idea when they're going to be available. Hopefully, we'll see some production before the end of the year, but
The
I
red
don't
one's
have
called the
confirmation
Redo.
on that. The Redo. That'll work. But also, a quick point for those of you that have video on this. This blue stock is what they've kind of talked about as the Gen 2 version, where it's still Allen wrench required to adjust the length of pull and the cheek. And then the Elite Sand version here is actually what will be the production chassis version. Those guys just graciously sent this to me in the last few days to so we could incorporate it into this discussion. So that one actually has the folding stock knuckle already on there and has the thumb screws to do length of pull and the cheek height.
Come on, muscles.
Same kind of fold hinge that you're used to on AI, and rock solid as they've always been. So because my main rifle I've been running for a while is an AX, that's why I'm choosing that direction for my trainer rifles.
They are very sturdy too. It's almost like when you're holding one of those. It's almost like
That's
you're almost
rock.
like you're holding something that was chiseled out of stone.
Mm-hmm.
Granite.
And it's just a 22.
Yeah, that's what's funny. I was shooting the Blue Do here a few weeks ago, and that's heavy. It's heavier than my M24 somehow.
Now,
Anyway.
here's a question for you.
Yeah.
Speaking of weight, I guess this goes beyond 22, but in all things precision shooting,
Mm-hmm.
if you're doing just bench, because we talked about weights on rifles while you're hunting.
Yeah.
Do you want a lightweight? Do you want a heavyweight? Does the weight
All of the
affect?
weight you can manage.
Weight is good
Yeah.
for a couple things. In the internal ballistics of it, your little impulses and your positional imperfections as you're holding the rifle. If the rifle's heavy, the rifle's not going to move
Or
from that.
muted.
Yeah.
And less
when
recoil.
and it's less recoil because it's more mass to move from the shot.
Which means you can see your shot impact, which is pretty much the most important thing in long-range shooting, is seeing your own impact through the scope.
And then measuring with the reticle, which is why we like the Christmas tree reticles and
Right.
that sort of thing. But one thing to the counterpoint on that, it's difficult to shoot a lightweight rifle very accurately.
Yeah, the lighter it is, the harder
For
it
the
is to
opposite,
shoot.
yeah, for the same reasons in reverse. Every little heartbeat, every imperfection that you deliver to that rifle, as far as the forces onto it, the rifle is more
Susceptible.
susceptible,
Yeah,
yes, to actually translating that into a moving muzzle.
Including your heartbeat.
Yeah.
So if anyone has any more questions on 22s, the kind of stuff we talked about, what's the best way to get a hold of you guys?
By phone or email, call in, email in, ask for any one of us, and we'll be glad to answer any questions you guys got.
Yeah, just be. One thing I like to see is someone who kind of knows kind of what they want to do. So have a good idea as to what you're trying to accomplish, and just it helps us work through how to set you
Help
up.
us help you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
help us help
We'll
you.
walk you through what the availability of everything is and your options, and get you into something that you're going to be happy with.
Yeah, because there's tons of options. And there's not enough time in the world to cover
Exactly.
everything. So yeah,
And there's no single right answer.
Yeah, so just give us a call. But yeah, that'll wrap it up for this one. If you have any further questions, of course, 570-368-3920 is our phone number. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram. We'll see you next time.